when they use the next crop rotation for wheat, it reduces the yield. It can cause this fusarium infection, which is called head blight fungus, and it's a disaster. And this information is just coming out this year for the first time, including by a whistleblower in the USDA. I mean, he's not officially a whistleblower. He did research on it, but they don't want him to talk about it because the USDA is designed to promote the biotechnology industry. In addition, we consume this Roundup in our food, and the Roundup is associated with all sorts of potential diseases more and more. In fact, one scientist, Dr. Carrasco in Argentina, found it was linked to birth defects in his studies with amphibians, and probably he surmised in humans. But when he announced his findings, he was attacked viciously. Four very large gentlemen showed up, a very aggressive gentleman showed up in his laboratory and tried to interrogate him. So it's the same thing over and over again. When people discover problems, they get the sharp side of the sword. Yeah.
How about the corn?
The corn has two varieties. It's 85% of the corn, and it's either Roundup Ready or Liberty Link, meaning that it survives applications of either Roundup herbicide or Liberty herbicide, or it produces a Bt toxin which kills insects. Now, the Austrian government did a study with corn that was both Roundup Ready and Bt toxin producing, and they gave the corn to mice, and the more the corn was fed to the mice, the fewer the babies they had and the smaller the babies were compared to when they were eating natural corn. When the Italian government did a study giving the Bt corn to mice, the mice had massive immune responses, which are correlated with all sorts of potential problems in humans. In Monsanto's own studies, which they do 90-day studies with rats, they say it passed with flying colors. But when lawsuits allowed the studies to be revealed, and it was re-examined with proper statistics, it showed signs of toxicity in the liver and kidneys and also immune system responses.
Jeffrey, what percent of the soy in the corn that's being planted is genetically modified?
Well, it's 91% of the soy, 85% of the corn. So that means if you eat a derivative of soy or corn, like a corn oil or a soy oil or a soy flour, unless they consciously separate the non-GMO, and they'll do it by labeling something non-GMO or organic. Unless they label it non-GMO or organic, then it's going to have the majority of its input as a genetically engineered crop.
What about your corn on the cob that you pick up? The ears of corn.
Well, years ago, the Cornell website estimated that only 3 to 5% of the corn on the cob in the country was a GMO, but that hasn't been updated, and we don't have the money to do the research, and so we don't know the percentage of corn on the cob. We don't know the percentage of the zucchini or yellow squash. One piece of good news is this: there is no popcorn that's genetically engineered, and it doesn't even cross-pollinate with field corn, so popcorn is safe.
Why are farmers using the genetically modified soy and corn seeds and not the old Mother Nature seeds?
Well, it's a combination of things. I was talking to a corn breeder, and he said he has a corn variety that resists or the European corn borer, which is exactly what the Bt insecticide-producing corn by Monsanto does. Mm-hmm. But he said that no one's interested because the big companies are just pushing the genetically modified varieties. They're pushing those traits, and so they're actually removing from their catalogs the popular non-GM varieties. So one of the reasons why farmers are uptaking this technology in large numbers is because it's being pushed on them and alternatives are being eliminated. But the farmer who uses the herbicide-tolerant, the pesticide-tolerant, or the herbicide-tolerant crops, they can weed more easily with less labor. They don't have to go into the fields and pull the weeds. They can just spray over the top of it. And those that use the Bt pesticide-producing corn, it's like an insurance policy in case that particular year they get an infestation of the European corn borer. But frankly, when the USDA looked at the statistics, they found that the GMOs were not increasing the profit of farmers. In fact, it was reducing the profit of farmers in many cases. And the most comprehensive study of yield showed that the average yield from a GM crop is reduced. It actually goes down 5 to 10% with soybeans, about 7.5% with canola, And you also end up with these incidences of complete disasters. Like it was just reported this week that there's been the Chinese cotton is overrun with pests. The Colombia cotton was a failure. 30% of the corn, genetically modified corn in South Africa, failed to germinate. We had massive problems in India. In fact, one of the big problems about unreliable genetically modified seeds is what is evident in India. The UK Daily Mail estimates that an incredible, astounding 125,000 farmers committed suicide because they planted BT cotton, and the money that they got from their paltry yields was not enough to pay back the high-interest loans that they had taken to pay for the more expensive seeds and the associated chemicals.
So they killed themselves.
They killed themselves mostly by drinking agricultural chemicals.
Unbelievable.
It's just, I mean, and my friend Vandana Shiva estimates it even higher at 200,000. This is just a catastrophe. And Monsanto goes in there and is removing the availability of non-GMO seeds in entire states. And they're getting spiritual leaders to promote GMOs and Bollywood actors to promote GMOs, and they've put their own people into the approval process so that those that are actually independent regulators, independently minded who want to evaluate it, they're absolutely frustrated because they see it's a complete rubber stamp. These regulators don't even read the submissions. They're just basically doing whatever the biotech industry asks them to do.
Now, I don't even want to call the old seeds non-GMO because they came first. So what do we label them as?
We can call them conventional.
Conventional or natural?
Yes.
All right, these conventional seeds, the corn, the soybeans, are there any left?
Yes, there are certainly conventional ones left. 15% of the corn, 9% of the soy, maybe 13% of the cotton. Now, we intend to reverse those numbers dramatically. We intend to create a tipping point of consumer rejection.
Let them grow again, huh?
Yes, exactly. And it wouldn't happen if we couldn't replace them all in one season because there's not enough seeds, but over a couple of seasons or more, we would be able to
take
back, yes.
By the way, why did the divine creator even come up with weeds? What's a purpose of a weed?
Well, in Africa, they don't call them weeds, they call them herbs, and it's part of their diet. And so this whole concept of monocultures and herbicide-tolerant crops, it ruins some of their biodiversity. But it turns out if you have proper soil biology with the fungus-bacteria ratio correct, you don't have the kind of weeds that we're seeing as in today's monocultures in the U.S. And so what we've created, actually, but with the surplus of nerve gas and bomb-making material in World War II, that's why we have fertilizer and pesticides, because of the defense industry had extra capacity and extra materials left over. And so they've created a perfect scenario to keep the plants diseased, to have high infestation of weeds, high infestation of insects, which demands more input. But if you go into really advanced, natural, sustainable farms, they don't require the chemicals. They don't have the problems because insects do not attack healthy plants in general. It's a balance there. And the weeds don't grow because the biodiversity covers that aspect too, as well as the soil biology. So we have it completely backwards, and a lot of the knowledge that was there in traditional farming is gone because all the farmers are now learning from the biotech industry and the agricultural chemical industry through their research that they conduct at the land-grant universities, etc.
Let's knock off canola and cottonseed oil.
Okay, so canola, we have 80 to 85% is genetically engineered, and all that is herbicide tolerant. Now, the problem with that is that when you grow canola and then you want to, let's say, grow non-GM canola, then the canola itself that hangs out as volunteer crops from the previous year, that becomes a weed that you can't kill with the normal herbicide because it is herbicide tolerant. Furthermore, the genes from the canola actually cross-pollinate with weeds that are relatives of the canola. So now you have wild mustard and other weeds that are accidentally herbicide tolerant. You can't kill them with the weed killer because they've cross-pollinated and picked up the resistance to the weed killer. Now, I mentioned these volunteer crops. That's a big problem with these contamination. If you plant canola for 1 year, it's genetically modified, and then you plant non-GM canola every year thereafter, for the next 16 years, you're going to have more than 1% contamination of GMOs because of the thousands or millions of seeds that end up in the soil that aren't harvested and that grow year after year and then spill more seeds. And so we have contamination not only in the same year to neighboring farms, but also into future generations.
Monsanto, by the way, 11, almost $12 billion in sales, I hear.
Yeah, and the thing is, they're amazing in their ability to completely spin the truth. I mean, I have in Genetic Roulette, there's a whole section on how companies rig research, and Monsanto is clearly highlighted there. When they were creating their genetically modified bovine growth hormone, and they wanted to show that the injections did not interfere with fertility in cows, documents were stolen from the FDA and made public, and it showed that they apparently secretly added cows to the study that were already pregnant before they were injected.
Now, Jeffrey, also they produce tomato, pepper seeds, eggplants, melons, cucumbers, pumpkins, squash, beans, broccoli, onions, lettuce. Are those GMs or are those just natural, the old conventional type?
Well, the ones that we buy in the market are non-GM because that's not yet commercialized. But they have a genetically modified counterpart to all of these waiting in laboratories or in field trials because Monsanto's stated goal to Arthur Anderson, the group that was their consultant years ago, was to genetically engineer 100% of all the commercial seeds in the world and patent them, to replace nature. And Anderson created the strategy and tactics to achieve that. And even in 1999, the biotech industry was still projecting that only 5 years later they were expecting to have 95% of all commercial seeds genetically engineered. Fortunately, a gag order was lifted 3 weeks after they made that prediction. A gag order from a scientist in the UK was lifted. He could finally talk about what he knew about the safety of GMOs, and all hell broke loose in the papers. 750 articles were written in a single month, and Europe was rallied against GMOs, and within a single week, virtually every major food company in Europe committed to stop using GM ingredients there because the tipping point of consumer rejection had been achieved.
Amazing. What about India?
India has the cotton. The cotton there is a disaster. We've got the suicides, we've got the itching and the symptoms, and we have also the animal deaths. The approval process is a complete sham, but the biotech industry wants to push through a whole bunch of vegetables quickly. They're picking these developing countries to get through these other products. And so there was a film based on my second book, Genetic Roulette, called Poison on the Platter, produced by a top Bollywood producer named Mahesh Bhatt, that came out last year in February, and it became one of the most talked about films in India, and it galvanized public support against GMOs for the first time in India. And that had full expression earlier this year when 100,000 people fasted against the potential introduction of genetically modified eggplant. 8,000 people showed up at 7 hearings put on by the Minister of Environment, and the minister said, no, we're not going to allow the eggplant to be approved. And so India is rising up against GMOs, and the U.S. State Department is very angry about that. They're trying to push the approval. In fact, Nina Fedorov, who's the scientific advisor for Hillary Clinton, visited India and actually gave a lot of false information to the press there about GMOs in an attempt to convince the public that they needed this dangerous technology.
Geez, and what happens to this young biotech student graduating from college who gets a nice offer to go to the biotech firms? Jeffrey, what do they do?
Well, it's worse than that. You see, there is this agreement between the U.S. government and the Indian government to have a knowledge initiative where they are actually bringing biotech students from India to study in the U.S. It's part of the way, it's the insipid, it's a horrible way that they're doing it, but they're bringing the bright scientists into Monsanto's laboratories, into laboratories in different